Hey, it's great to have you here. Before we dive into today's story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let me know which city or country you're representing. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Okay, let's get into it. The city's skyline was a jagged line of crystal and steel, a testament to ambition that Julian Vance knew intimately. From his office on the 88th floor of Vance Tower, the world below was a silent, intricate machine, and he was its undisputed master. The office itself was a reflection of his soul. Vast, minimalist, and cold. A single slab of black marble served as his desk, holding nothing but a sleek monitor and a phone that connected him to a multi-billion-dollar empire. There were no photographs, no personal trinkets, no warmth. Wealth had built him a fortress, and grief had locked the gates from the inside. He was on a conference call, his voice a low, precise instrument of command. That's not a projection, it's a fantasy. The resonance cascade in the Chimera prototype isn't a bug. It's a foundational flaw, a $500 million flaw. Solve it. I don't care how. He ended the call without a goodbye, the silence rushing back in to fill the void. Project Chimera. It was supposed to be his magnum opus, a revolutionary communication technology. Instead, it was a ghost in his machine, a flaw so fundamental no one could find its source. It was threatening to unravel a decade of work, and with it, the market's faith in Vance Innovations. The pressure was immense, a physical weight on his chest, but Julian felt it only as a familiar, dull ache. It was the only thing he had allowed himself to feel for years. His intercom buzzed, a soft, deferential chime. "Mr. Vance," his assistant Clara said, her voice tight with anxiety. "I'm so sorry to interrupt. There's a young lady here for the 10:30 interview slot." Julian's brow furrowed. He tapped his screen. His calendar was empty. "I have no interviews today, Clara." "I know, sir. She insists. She says it's about the problem." "The problem?" Julian's voice sharpened. Security on Project Chimera was absolute. The instability was a closely guarded secret, known only to the board and the lead engineering team. "Who is she? From which department?" There was a pause. "Sir, she's a child." Julian's irritation spiked. A prank. A tasteless, infuriating waste of his time. "Clara, have security escort her and whoever is with her out of the building, and tighten lobby protocols. This is unacceptable." "Right away, sir?" He turned back to the window, dismissing the interruption. But before he could sink back into the cold calculus of his problem, the door to his office whispered open. He turned, his eyes narrowing, ready to unleash a fury that had leveled boardrooms. Standing in the doorway was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She was small, dressed in a simple, clean dress that was slightly faded, and sturdy shoes that had seen better days. Her dark, curly hair was pulled back in 2 neat braids. She stood with a strange, unnerving poise, her small hands clasped behind her back. But it wasn't her presence that made the air leave Julian's lungs. It was her face. It was a face he knew better than his own, a face he saw every time he dared to close his eyes, a face that haunted the hollow chambers of his heart, the same wide, intelligent dark eyes, the same stubborn set of her small chin, the same sprinkle of freckles across her nose. It was the face of Elena. The world tilted on its axis. The silent, controlled fortress of his office suddenly felt fragile, the glass walls ready to shatter. He couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. Who was this girl? She took a small step forward, her worn shoes making no sound on the polished Italian marble. She looked at him directly, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Vance?" she asked, her voice clear and small in the cavernous room. "I'm Mia. I came to fix your $500 million problem." For the first time in 10 years, Julian Vance felt something other than grief or ambition. He felt a profound, earth-shattering shock. The carefully constructed walls around his heart didn't just crack, they were instantly pulverized, leaving him exposed and reeling in the sudden, terrifying light of a ghost from his past. It was impossible. And yet there she stood, a memory made of flesh and blood. The child, Mia, stood her ground, regarding him with an unnerving seriousness. The name echoed in the silent room, a soft sound against the hard edges of his life. Julian finally found his voice, though it felt like a stranger's. "Who sent you?" he asked, his tone rougher than he intended. "My mom said I should be brave," Mia said simply, as if that explained everything. She said, "Big problems need brave ideas." "Your mother," Julian repeated, the words tasting like ash. He took a half-step closer, his mind racing, trying to connect impossible dots. Elena was gone. A car crash a decade ago had stolen her from the world, from him. They had been young, brilliant, and furiously in love. They had also fought, a terrible fight, born of his ambition, and her fear of being second place to it. He had walked away to cool off, planning to return the next day with an apology and a ring. He never got the chance. "What is your mother's name?" Before she could answer, the door opened again. A woman rushed in, her face a mask of panic. She was beautiful, with worried eyes and paint stains on her jeans. Behind her, peeking out from behind her legs, was another little girl, a girl identical to Mia in every way, a perfect mirror. "Mia! Oh, thank goodness," the woman breathed, rushing forward and scooping the little girl into her arms. "I am so sorry," she said, turning to Julian, her eyes flashing with a mix of apology and defiance. "She slipped away. We were at the gallery down the street. She's imaginative. I can't imagine what she said to you, but please, we'll be out of your way." She held Mia tightly, her knuckles white, while the other twin clung to her leg, staring at Julian with wide, fearful eyes. Julian's gaze flickered between the two identical faces. Twins. The sight sent another shockwave through him. He felt dizzy, unmoored from reality. "You didn't answer my question," he said, his voice low, directed at the woman. "Your name." The woman's chin lifted. She had a protective fire in her eyes that he recognized. It was the same fire Elena had. "I'm Isabella Flores, and these are my daughters, Mia and Maya." She stressed the word, "my." "Come on, girls, let's go." "But, Mom, I have to tell him the thing," Mia protested, wiggling in her arms. "About the frequency cascade." Julian froze. Frequency cascade. It was the precise technical term his lead engineer had used in the confidential brief, a term that had never left the R&D labs. "What did you just say?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Isabella's face went pale. She shot a look at Mia. "It's nothing. She hears things. We have to go." She practically fled the office, herding the two girls before her, leaving Julian standing in a silence that was no longer empty, but filled with roaring questions. He stood motionless for a long time, the image of the two girls seared into his mind. Elena's eyes, Elena's chin, Elena's freckles, ×2. And a technical term for his most secret, most catastrophic corporate failure. It wasn't a prank. It was something else, something that twisted the fabric of his past into a shape he couldn't comprehend. He walked back to his desk, his legs unsteady. He buzzed his assistant. "Clara," he said, his voice strained, "get me Arthur Finch. Tell him it's a code black. I want him here in an hour." Code black was a designation he had used only twice before. It meant absolute priority, infinite resources, and total discretion. Arthur Finch was a private investigator, a quiet, ghost-like man who specialized in finding truths that were buried deep. Julian had used him to vet corporate takeovers, to dig up dirt on rivals. Now he would use him to excavate his own life. While he waited, Julian pulled up the building's security footage. He watched the clip of Isabella and the twins in the lobby. He zoomed in on their faces. The resemblance to Elena was uncanny, breathtaking. He pulled up an old digital photo from a hard drive he hadn't accessed in 10 years. It was him and Elena in college, smiling, their arms around each other. He placed the image side by side with the security feed on his massive monitor. It was like looking at a photograph and its living echo. His mind raced back to his last conversation with Elena, the fight. It had been about a startup opportunity he wanted to pursue, one that would mean moving, dropping out of his PhD program. She had called him reckless, obsessed. He had called her afraid. He'd stormed out. A week later, he'd gotten the call about the accident. Arthur arrived, a man as gray and unassuming as the city fog. He entered without a word and sat, waiting. Julian turned the monitor towards him. "Find out everything," Julian said, his voice hoarse. "This woman, Isabella Flores. These children, Mia and Maya. I want to know where they eat, where they sleep, who their friends are. I want to know their blood type. I want to know why they look like the woman in this photograph. And I want to know how a 7-year-old girl knows the words frequency cascade." Arthur studied the screen, his expression unreadable. He simply nodded. "And their birth date," Julian added, a knot tightening in his stomach. "Find out their exact date of birth." The days that followed were a form of torture. Julian tried to work, but the numbers on the screen blurred. The cold logic that had guided his life now failed him. His mind was a maelstrom of memories and possibilities, each one more terrifying than the last. He saw the girls' faces everywhere, in the reflections on the glass, in the patterns of the city lights. He would find himself staring into space, replaying Mia's words, seeing Maya's fearful eyes. He felt a phantom ache in his arms, the ghost of a life he never knew he'd lost. He started digging through his own past, through old boxes he'd paid to keep in climate-controlled storage, relics of a life before Vance Innovations. He found old letters from Elena, her elegant script full of jokes and dreams. He found a small velvet box. Inside was the ring he never gave her, a simple diamond on a platinum band. Holding it felt like holding a live coal. The grief he had so meticulously buried for a decade erupted, raw and overwhelming. He sat on the floor of the sterile storage unit, surrounded by the ghosts of his past, and for the first time since she died, he wept. Arthur's first report came 2 days later, a slim, encrypted file. Julian opened it with trembling hands. Isabella Flores, 34, a freelance graphic designer and artist, struggling financially, no criminal record, no known partner. She had been Elena's roommate and best friend in college. The report included photos of her apartment building in a working-class neighborhood, the paint peeling on the exterior. It included a picture of the girls on a school playground laughing as they swung on the monkey bars. The sight of them, so vibrant and alive, sent a pang of something fierce and protective through him. And then he saw it. The document Arthur had managed to acquire, a copy of their birth certificate. He scanned the details, his heart hammering against his ribs. Mia and Maya Flores, date of birth, October 12th. He did the math, his mind working with cold, frantic precision. He and Elena had their fight in January. He left. The accident was in February. October? It was 9 months later, almost to the day. The report stated there was no father listed on the birth certificate, but Julian knew. He felt it with a certainty that defied all logic, a truth that resonated in the very marrow of his bones. He just needed the proof. The final irrefutable piece that would either confirm his new reality or condemn him as a man driven mad by grief. He called Arthur. "I need more," he said, his voice low and steady, belying the storm inside him. "I need something definitive, something that will hold up in a court of law. something that will hold up against my own doubt." Arthur understood. "It will be difficult, and it will require getting close." "Do whatever it takes," Julian commanded. The next day, Arthur's plan was in motion. He learned the girls had a favorite after-school treat: ice cream from a small parlor near their apartment. Julian found himself sitting in a black town car across the street, feeling like a spy in his own life. He watched as Isabella and the twins emerged from their building. They were holding hands. Mia was talking animatedly, waving her arms, while Maya walked quietly, clutching a well-loved sketchbook to her chest. They were a unit, a small, fierce, self-contained world. Arthur, disguised as a clumsy tourist, accidentally bumped into them near the ice cream shop, dropping a bag of souvenirs. As Isabella and the girls helped him pick them up, he deftly plucked a single, stray hair from the sleeve of Mia's little blue coat. It was over in seconds. Arthur gave a grateful nod and disappeared into the crowd. Julian watched them go into the shop, his heart aching with a strange combination of longing and terror. He saw them through the window, saw Mia laugh, saw Maya carefully sketch in her book. He was a breath away, a pane of glass away, from a life that might have been his. The hair was sent to a private lab, one that owed Julian a significant favor. They promised results in 24 hours. It was the longest 24 hours of Julian's life. During that time, the crisis with Project Chimera reached its peak. The board was in a panic. His chief rival, a slick and ambitious board member named Marcus Thorne, was circling like a shark, sensing blood in the water. He was calling for an emergency meeting, demanding answers, suggesting Julian's leadership was faltering. Julian sat in the boardroom, the air thick with tension. Marcus was pontificating, his voice dripping with false concern. "Julian, we all respect what you've built. But a $500 million write-down? The market will crucify us. You seem distracted. We need a leader who is fully present." Julian stared at him, but he didn't see him. He was seeing Elena's face, hearing Mia's voice. His phone vibrated on the table. A new message. The sender was Arthur. The subject line was a single word: definitive. He ignored the murmurs of the board members, the pointed glare from Marcus. He opened the encrypted file. It was a PDF, a lab report filled with genetic markers and scientific jargon, but he didn't need to read the details. His eyes went straight to the bottom line, the text highlighted in bold. Paternity test results. Julian Vance probability of paternity, 99%. The world stopped. The sterile high-stakes drama of the boardroom faded into an insignificant hum. The voices became distant noise. The $500 million problem on the table seemed trivial, meaningless. Marcus Thorne, his rival, was nothing more than a ghost. 99.9999%. My daughters. The words weren't just a thought. They were a physical impact, a revelation that reconfigured his entire being. He was a father. He had been a father for 7 years and hadn't known it. Elena hadn't just died. She had left a part of herself behind. 2 parts. For him. "Julian, did you hear me?" Marcus's voice cut through the fog, sharp and impatient. "We need a decision." Julian looked up, his eyes focusing on Marcus for the first time. The man saw a competitor. He saw a business problem. He had no idea he was looking at a man whose universe had just been fundamentally and irrevocably rewritten. Julian stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. The entire board fell silent. "The meeting is over," Julian said, his voice calm, but with an undercurrent of something they had never heard before. Not anger, not command. It was something far more powerful. It was certainty. He walked out of the room, leaving behind a stunned board, a sputtering rival, and the smoldering ruins of his old life. He had a family to find. Julian didn't go back to his office. He couldn't bear its sterile silence, its cold, empty spaces that now seemed to mock him with the life he hadn't lived. He went home to his penthouse, a place just as vast and lonely, and called Isabella. His hands were shaking. What could he possibly say? "Hello. Our mutual deceased friend had my children, and I'd like to be in their life now. 7 years too late?" She answered on the fourth ring, her voice cautious. "Hello. Isabella. It's Julian Vance." There was a long silence on the other end. "How did you get this number?" she finally asked, her tone laced with suspicion. "That doesn't matter," he said, softening his voice. "Please, I'm not calling as a CEO. I'm not angry about what happened at my office. I need to understand. I need you to talk to me. Can we meet? Somewhere neutral. A park, please." He hated the pleading note in his own voice, but he didn't care. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. He must have sounded as broken as he felt, because she agreed. They decided on a small park halfway between her apartment and his tower, a patch of green amidst the concrete jungle. He arrived early, dressed not in his usual tailored suit, but in simple slacks and a cashmere sweater, an attempt to look less intimidating, more human. He felt like an imposter. He watched them arrive from a distance. Isabella held both girls' hands tightly, a lioness guarding her cubs. They sat on a bench near a playground. The girls, sensing the tension, stayed close to Isabella. For a few minutes, no one spoke. The only sounds were the distant city traffic and the laughter of other children. Finally, Isabella looked at him, her gaze direct and unflinching. "Elena was my best friend," she began, her voice quiet but strong. "She was more like a sister to me. When you two had that fight, she was devastated, but she was also angry. She felt like she was losing you to your ambition." Julian flinched. The words a direct hit. It was the truth. "A week later, she found out she was pregnant," Isabella continued, her eyes filling with tears. "She was terrified and overjoyed all at once. She was going to tell you. She was trying to find the right way, the right time. She didn't want the babies to be another battleground between you." He felt a fresh wave of grief, so powerful it almost buckled him. "Why didn't she just call me?" he whispered. "Pride? Fear? Love?" "It was all tangled up," Isabella said. "And then the accident happened. I was with her at the hospital. She made me promise. She was so scared. Scared that your world, your family with all their money and influence, would take them from her, turn them into something they weren't meant to be. She made me promise to protect them, to give them a normal life. A life full of love and art, not boardrooms and brackets." The story settled over him, heavy as a shroud. He hadn't just lost Elena, he had lost this too. 7 years of first steps, first words, scraped knees, and bedtime stories. It was a debt he could never repay. "She left something for you," Isabella said, reaching into her bag. "For when the time was right. I guess this is it." She handed him a worn shoebox-sized container sealed with tape. "It's letters and some of her old journals." He took the box with trembling hands. It felt heavier than his entire company. "About Mia," Isabella said, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "And the frequency cascade. Elena was a brilliant physicist, you know, far more brilliant than you. She used to talk about her theories all the time. After she died, when I was scared and alone with 2 newborns, I would read her journals out loud. It felt like she was still with me. The girls heard those words their whole lives. To them, they're just part of Mommy Elena's magic stories." It all clicked into place. Mia hadn't hacked his server. She had simply repeated a fragment of her mother's genius, a phrase she'd heard 1,000 times, thinking it was a magic spell to solve a problem. A problem she'd likely overheard Isabella worrying about on the phone, the financial pressures of their life. He looked over at the girls. Maya was sketching furiously in her notebook, her tongue sticking out in concentration. Mia was watching him with those impossibly familiar eyes, her head tilted. "Are you sad?" she asked. Julian was startled. He looked down at his hands, then back at her. "Yes," he said, the admission raw and honest. "I am." "My mom says it's okay to be sad," Mia said sagely. "She says it means you love someone a lot." A tear escaped and traced a path down Julian's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. For the first time, he let his grief be seen. He spent the next hour just watching them, asking tentative questions. "What's your favorite color? What are you drawing? Do you like school?" He learned that Mia loved science and puzzles, and that Maya was a budding artist, just like Isabella. He felt a fragile, thread-like connection begin to form, a tiny bridge across a vast canyon of lost time. He knew with absolute certainty that this was the most important merger of his life. The box Isabella had given him sat on his marble desk, a humble cardboard intruder in a world of glass and chrome. For 2 days, Julian couldn't bring himself to open it. It felt too final, a door to a past he wasn't sure he was strong enough to face. Instead, he focused on the present. He had Arthur run a discreet financial check on Isabella. The results were sobering. She was 2 months behind on rent, with an eviction notice pending. His first instinct, the old Julian's instinct, was to solve it with a wire transfer. An anonymous deposit, a clean, simple transaction. But as he was about to instruct his bank, he stopped. He remembered the pride in Isabella's eyes, her fierce independence. Charity would feel like an insult, an assertion of the power she feared. It would be a gesture from Julian Vance, the CEO. He needed to be Julian, the father. He looked at the photos Arthur had taken, his eyes lingering on Maya, the quiet one, always with her sketchbook. An idea began to form. He made a call, not to a banker, but to an old friend who owned one of the most prestigious contemporary art galleries in the city. He sent him a few candid photos of Maya's drawings taken by Arthur. He didn't mention who the artist was, only that he was championing a promising new talent. 2 days later, Isabella received a call from the gallery. They had seen some of her daughter's conceptual work online, a white lie Julian had concocted, and were impressed by the raw familial emotionality. They offered her a significant commission to create a series of paintings for an upcoming exhibit on urban families. It was enough to cover her debts for a year and give her the creative freedom she'd only dreamed of. When she called Julian, her voice thick with disbelief and joy, he felt a satisfaction deeper than any corporate victory. He started visiting them, cautiously at first. He brought no expensive gifts, just his time. He'd meet them at the park after school. He learned Mia's favorite dinosaur was the velociraptor, because they were smart and worked in teams, and that Maya's favorite color was the specific shade of purple found in the sky just after the sun sets. He was building a new vocabulary, a language of small, vital human details that had been absent from his life. One afternoon, he was at their small, cluttered, but warm apartment. It was the complete opposite of his penthouse, full of color, stacked books, the smell of turpentine, and cinnamon. He was helping Mia with a complex Lego model, while Maya showed him her drawings at the kitchen table. Suddenly, the sky outside darkened. A low rumble of thunder echoed through the city. Maya gasped, dropping her crayon. Her eyes grew wide with terror, and she scrambled under the table, pulling her knees to her chest. "Oh, honey, it's okay," Isabella said, moving to comfort her. But Julian was already kneeling down. He remembered. Elena had been terrified of thunderstorms, a deep primal fear she could never explain. Her father, a gentle literature professor, had invented a story to calm her. Without thinking, Julian found the words coming to him. "Hey, Maya," he said softly, peering under the table. "Did I ever tell you about the Sky Drummers?" Maya shook her head, her little body trembling. "Well, way up high, above the clouds," Julian began, his voice a low murmur, There are these big, gentle giants, and they have enormous drums. When the world gets too quiet and sad, they play a little song to wake it up, to remind everyone there's still power and music in the world. That's all thunder is. It's just the sky drummers saying hello." Maya peeked out at him. Another crash of thunder, louder this time, made her flinch. "That was the big one," Julian said with a small smile. "That's Bartholomew. He's the leader." A tiny giggle escaped Maya's lips. She slowly crawled out from under the table and, to everyone's surprise, she launched herself into Julian's arms, burying her face in his sweater. He froze for a second. Then his arms came around her instinctively, holding her small, warm body against his. He could feel her heartbeat begin to slow. He closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her hair. A feeling, fierce and absolute, washed over him. It was love. Not the ghost of a memory, not a sense of duty, but a living, breathing, ferocious love for this child. His child. That evening, after he left their apartment, the city seemed different. The lights were warmer, the streets less lonely. When he got back to his penthouse, he walked directly to the cardboard box. He slit the tape and opened it. Inside, nestled among bundles of letters tied with ribbon, were Elena's journals. He opened the top one. Her familiar script filled the page, and on the very first entry he read, she had written about her theory of sympathetic resonance, the frequency cascade. She believed it could be stabilized, not by dampening the energy, but by introducing a harmonizing frequency. It was a solution so elegant, so counterintuitive, that none of his engineers had ever considered it. He read for hours, devouring her words, her thoughts, her dreams for their children. He was not just solving a corporate problem. He was connecting with her, with the brilliant mind and beautiful soul he had lost. In that moment, holding her journal, with the memory of Maya's hug still warming him, his two worlds, the cold world of his business and the new, warm world of his family, began to merge. But a man like Julian Vance does not simply drop off the grid without notice. His sudden shifts in behavior, the canceled meetings, the abrupt departures, the newfound humanity, were seismic events at Vance Innovations. And they were being watched. Marcus Thorne, his ambition sharpened by Julian's perceived weakness, saw an opportunity. He had his own people watching Julian. They reported back with grainy photos. Julian at a playground pushing a little girl on a swing. Julian buying 2 identical pink backpacks. Julian sitting on a park bench with a struggling artist and 2 secret children. To Marcus, it was the perfect weapon. The company was already teetering on the brink with the Chimera failure. The narrative was simple and deadly. Julian Vance, the once unflappable titan, had cracked under the pressure. He was being distracted by a personal crisis, a gold-digging woman, and her illegitimate children, while the empire burned. It was leverage, pure and simple. Marcus began to quietly poison the well. In hushed conversations with other board members, he painted a picture of an unstable leader, a man making emotional, irrational decisions. "Have you seen him lately?" he'd whisper. "He's not all there. We have a fiduciary duty to the shareholders to consider a change in leadership before this gets out." He compiled a dossier, photos of Julian with the girls, copies of Isabella's eviction notice, a summary of her sudden financial windfall from the art gallery, painting it as a payoff. It was a tapestry of lies woven from threads of truth, designed to destroy Julian's credibility. The pressure mounted. Marcus formally called for an emergency board meeting to discuss Julian's capacity as CEO. The agenda was a thinly veiled coup d'etat. The meeting was set for Friday at 3 p.m. The fate of the company and a potential merger with a European conglomerate that hinged on Chimera's success hung in the balance. Marcus knew it wasn't enough to just win in the boardroom. He needed to win in the court of public opinion. He needed to salt the earth so that even if Julian survived the vote, his authority would be shattered. On the Thursday night before the meeting, he made a call to a journalist he kept on his payroll, a man known for his salacious, career-ending exposés. He leaked the entire dossier. The next morning, the world exploded. The headline was on every major news site, a brutal public vivisection of Julian's nascent family. Vance's folly. Billionaire CEO secret heirs emerge as $500 empire crumbles. The article was vicious, portraying Isabella as a manipulative schemer who had timed her appearance to extort a vulnerable man. It questioned the children's paternity and painted Julian as a fool, losing his grip on reality. Julian woke up to 100 missed calls. He saw the headline and felt a cold fury, colder and purer than any anger he had ever known. It wasn't about him. They were attacking his family. They were using his children as ammunition. His phone rang again. It was Isabella. She was sobbing. "They're outside my apartment, Julian," she cried, her voice breaking. "Reporters, cameras everywhere. They're shouting questions at the girl's window. Mia is hiding in the closet and Maya is terrified. You have to do something. This is what I was afraid of. Your world is destroying us." Her words were a knife in his gut. Her worst fears, the very promise she had made to Elena, were coming true because of him. The external threat wasn't just at the gates. It had breached the walls and was terrorizing his family. The stakes had been raised from a corporate power struggle to the safety and well-being of his daughters. He stood in the center of his silent penthouse, the city sprawling beneath him. On one side was the board meeting, his company, his legacy, the entire structure of his life's work. His lawyers were already calling, advising a course of action, issue a press release denying everything, distance himself from Isabella and the children until a paternity test could be officially conducted, focus on calming the market, and go into that boardroom and fight. It was the logical choice, the business choice, the choice the old Julian would have made without hesitation. Then he looked at his desk. Taped to the corner of his monitor was a drawing Maya had made for him. It was a wobbly crayon depiction of a tall man with black hair, a smiling woman, and two little girls holding his hands under a giant, multicolored rainbow. A family, his family. He thought of Mia's brave, serious face in his office. He thought of Maya's small body trembling against his during the thunderstorm. He thought of his promise to Elena, the one he never got to make, to always protect her, to always choose her. The choice wasn't a choice at all. There was no dilemma. The board meeting, the company, the $500 million project, it was all just noise. There was only one thing that mattered. He picked up his phone. He didn't call his lawyers or his PR team. He called the head of his personal security detail. "Get a team to Isabella Flores's apartment. Now. Clear a path. No one gets near them, and have my car brought to the front." His assistant buzzed through on the intercom, her voice frantic. "Mr. Vance, the board meeting is in an hour. The car is waiting to take you to headquarters." "Cancel it," Julian said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "I'm not going." He was going to war, not for his company, for his daughters. The scene outside Isabella's apartment building was a media-feeding frenzy. A chaotic swarm of reporters, photographers, and satellite trucks clogged the narrow street. They shouted questions, their cameras flashing like strobe lights, a relentless assault on the small, unassuming brick building. Julian's car sliced through the chaos, his driver expertly navigating the mob. When the car stopped, Julian didn't wait for his security to open the door. He stepped out into the storm. The shouting intensified, a wall of noise and accusation. "Mr. Vance, is it true you've abandoned your company? Are these children yours? Is Ms. Flores extorting you?" He ignored them. He stood for a moment, letting the cameras find him. His face was a granite mask of cold, controlled rage. He wasn't the CEO of Vance Innovations anymore. He was a father protecting his territory. He walked towards the entrance of the building, his security team forming a wedge around him. He stopped on the front steps, turned, and faced the press. "My name is Julian Vance," he said, his voice cutting through the din, amplified by a dozen microphones. "The children inside that building are my daughters. Their names are Mia and Maya." He paused, letting the words sink in, a direct confirmation that shattered Marcus's narrative of doubt. "They are the most important thing in my world. Their mother is a woman of integrity and courage who has been subjected to a campaign of lies. This ends now. Anyone who threatens my family will answer to me directly." He turned his back on the stunned silence and entered the building. He found Isabella in the living room trying to comfort the girls. Mia was pale and silent, and Maya was crying softly. When Isabella saw him, she looked both relieved and furious. "I told you this would happen," she said, her voice shaking. "And I'm here to fix it," he replied, his gaze soft as he looked at the girls. He knelt down. "Hey, Sky Drummers," he said, using his nickname for them. "It's a bit loud out there, isn't it? Don't worry, I'm making it stop." He looked at Isabella. "I made a promise to Elena that I couldn't keep. I'm not breaking my promise to you, or to them. Trust me." Meanwhile, across town in the Vance Tower boardroom, Marcus Thorne was enjoying his moment of triumph. Julian's chair was empty. "As you can see," Marcus said to the assembled board members, "Mr. Vance has abandoned his post at the most critical juncture in this company's history. He has confirmed the lurid details of the story himself. He is compromised. We must act now to save this company." He called for the vote of no confidence. The motion was seconded. As the chairman began the roll call, the boardroom doors swung open. Julian Vance walked in. He was no longer dressed in the casual sweater, but in one of his impeccably tailored suits, his armor. He looked calm, powerful, and completely in control. A wave of shock rippled through the room. Marcus's face went white. "Forgive my tardiness, gentlemen," Julian said, his voice smooth as steel. "I was attending to a more important merger." He walked not to his chair, but to the large whiteboard at the front of the room. He ignored Marcus completely. "Project Chimera," he announced, picking up a black marker. "The problem isn't the resonance cascade. We've been trying to suppress it. That's been our mistake." He began to draw, sketching out a complex series of equations and diagrams. The theory, developed by the late Dr. Helena Rosas, suggested that the cascade could be stabilized by introducing a harmonizing frequency, a counterpart signal that doesn't fight the resonance but embraces it, turning the chaotic energy into a stable, amplified wave. He drew for 10 minutes, his explanation a master class in physics and engineering. It was the solution from Elena's journal, now fully realized in his mind. It was elegant, brilliant, and undeniably correct. He hadn't just saved the project, he'd revolutionized it. The room was silent, the board members staring in awe. Julian put the cap back on the marker. "The Elena project, as it will now be called, is viable. The European merger will proceed on our terms." He finally turned his gaze to Marcus. It was utterly glacial. "I know who leaked the documents," he said quietly. "I know who paid the journalist. I know you shorted our stock yesterday morning, anticipating a collapse." He placed a small data stick on the table. "This contains the server logs, the financial records, and a sworn statement from the journalist, who was surprisingly cooperative when faced with a federal investigation. You are fired, Marcus. Your shares will be seized to cover the damages, and I imagine you'll be hearing from the SEC shortly." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He had completely and utterly destroyed his rival, not by choosing his business over his family, but by drawing strength and inspiration from them. He had won because he was no longer just a CEO. He was a father. His transformation was complete, solidified in the crucible of conflict, and every person in that room knew they were looking at a new man. 1 year later. The sterile penthouse was gone, sold to another lonely billionaire. Julian now lived in a sprawling, warm house in the suburbs with a big backyard and a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree. His office, once a temple to minimalism, was now joyfully cluttered. Crayon drawings of sky drummers and rainbow families were taped to the walls. A half-finished Lego castle sat on the corner of his desk. The Elena Project had become the new gold standard in global communications, making Vance Innovations more successful than ever. But Julian worked differently now. He left the office at 5 o'clock. He never missed a school play or a soccer game. He took weekends off. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the freshly cut grass. The air smelled of charcoal and summer. Julian, wearing a faded t-shirt and a baseball cap, flipped burgers on a grill. Isabella, her art career flourishing, sat at a picnic table, laughing as she watched the girls. Mia was explaining the aerodynamic principles of a frisbee to her sister, who was patiently trying to teach her how to draw a horse that didn't look like a dog. They were happy. They were safe. Julian brought a plate of burgers to the table and sat down, sliding his arm around Isabella. They weren't a fairy tale romance, but something quieter, deeper, a partnership forged in shared love for the girls and mutual respect, a family. He looked at his daughters, their faces bright with life, their laughter the new soundtrack to his world. The gaping hole in his heart, the one he had tried to fill with money and success, was gone. It had been replaced by something real, something vibrant. He remembered the cold silence of his old life, the view from the 88th floor, how small and distant everything had seemed. Now, sitting here, surrounded by the three people who were his entire world, he had never felt so grounded, so powerful, so completely and utterly rich. He was finally home.